Hi, my name is Glenn and welcome to my boat project Aquarius. In this episode, I start working on the furniture on the inside of my Aquarius 21. This is a boat that was built in 1971, and when I first bought it, I gutted it. All the furniture, all the wood inside was rotten. And that was not worth saving anyways, because it would have been more work to fill in the gaps than it is to start over. And this way I can do a little bit of customization. So today I am going to build the long benches on the port and starboard side of the boat. They start underneath the cockpit and run forward. And I'm just going to do the first 8 feet. Now on the port side, that 8 feet is going to end right about where the kitchenette is. On the starboard, I will extend the bench a little bit more all the way into the V-berth. Now I have all of my stuff set up. I have some sketches of what I'm going to do. I'm making some customizations. When the boat was originally built, the benches went straight back from fore to aft. What I'm going to do is make them a little bit wider when they get underneath the cockpit, because there was a gap about this far between the edge of the bench and the inside of the cockpit. And I'm just going to make that bench go all the way to the cockpit and attach to it, which will give the cockpit and the whole aft side of the boat more stability. It will also give the person who's laying there some more space and, of course, more room in any of the storage or anything I want to put back there. I just really saw no reason to have a 10-inch gap for stuff. It's really unusable. So I'm making that wider under the cockpit, but it's going to resume its regular width once it gets inside the cabin. So I have to change it somehow. So I've decided I want to make a bend, a nice smooth bend in the plywood. Now I could cut it off at a 290-degree angles or a 45 or some other angle. But I'm gonna try bending first. If that's just not gonna work out, then I will alt for one of those other methods that I just mentioned. Another thing I'm customizing is I'm lowering the bench, probably 4 inches, I think, from where it was originally. And that is so I'm a tall person. I'm about 6'1", 6'2", and I want to be able to sit on the bench and not be banging my head. Now it's going to be a pretty low bench, but hey, it's my boat. So I find it important to be able to sit up straight without having to hunch. Another reason I want it lower is when I'm laying under the cockpit on that bench, which will be a berth. It'll change its name to a berth once somebody's laying on it. I want to be able to lay on my back with my toes sticking straight up. And that's going to call for, 12 to 14 inches, unless I'm wearing shoes, then even higher. So there's another reason for lowering the bench. Give me a little more room back there. And that's more important than having larger storage. I mean, it's going to be hard to get to anyways, so I don't really see the need to have a bunch of storage back there, not things I'm going to get to often. Plus, with more height in there, it'll be easier to get back there and get to the storage. So there's many, many reasons why I'm doing what I'm doing, and now you get to watch me attempt to build these things. I've already measured what I need to do. I sketched out some rough estimates of a wooden jig to hold the plywood as I put the bend in it. And I'm gonna try doing it with water. So here we go. I'm gonna start off by cutting the plywood, and then I'm going to be as efficient as I can and use the same wood for my jig. And then when I'm done with the jig, I'm gonna have that wood still in its 8-foot length so I can use it again for my plywood stand. Let's get to it. All right, well, I'm done. My first experience with wood bending, plywood bending specifically, is done. The trough worked really well. My jig, whatever you call it, my contraption worked really well. It's really funny how I can plan things out in my head, go through it all, do a whole run through in my head, visualize it all, even write out some things of how I want it to be done. But then when it actually comes to it, there's some changes that are made. Now, not many, but one thing that was a big one was that I was able to bend both pieces of wood at the same time, where in my head, I thought I was going to be doing one, and after it sat up, then I would do the next one the next day or the day after that, whenever the first one was ready. I don't know why I didn't think of doing them both. All I had to do is make sure they were flipped opposite ways, so the front is at the same place, and it's all good. The trough worked really well. My steamer did not seem to work at all. All right, it's the next morning. The wood has been drying all night. I had my infrared lights on the top and the bottom. I weighted down some areas that needed a little assistance staying straight. Oop, a little bit of wetness under there. And I'm gonna take off the clamps to see if it held. It might still be wet based on what I see here. That was one thing I was hoping the infrared lights would do, is heat it up enough to get underneath the wood. All right. Things are coming along nicely. It's going at least as well as I hoped. All right, well, I've changed my mind. This is the wood that I spent bending yesterday, and it went back to flat pretty darn easily. I put some weight on it just to hold it in place. I am going to increase the bend. I'm going to shorten the distance that it bends those 10 inches. It was taking 2 feet to go from here down 10 inches to here. Now I want to do that in half that distance, so 1 foot. I think that would give me a little more cabin room. And in order to facilitate that bend a little more easily without the wood splitting or cracking and peeling off, I'm going to cut the grooves, those channels in the backside of it. And the grooves will go all the way down to either halfway or maybe down to the last ply, I'm not sure. So hopefully that works. I do have some more wood, so if I totally mess it up, I can start over again. So we'll see. It's all in the sake of learning, but at the same time, it's also trying to get what I want. This is my second attempt at bending plywood. I shortened up the transition over the 10 inches from 2 feet to only 1 foot. Now let's take a look and see how the sharp bend did. I tried to make the bend a little more gradual, but it was still too sharp. Cracked that plywood pretty good. I still have not realized that it's because I tried to bend it in line with the fibers and that my transition was still too sharp. I also haven't yet realized that my jig is 2.5 inches too tall. That's going to be a palm smack to the forehead.
Anyway, it is what it is, and I will deal with it. But next time I bend plywood or other wood, I will know better.
All right, I'm analyzing my work, my attempt at bending plywood. Now, my first time, I gave it more of a broad bend, the sharp angle. So it's all the bend is right here. Now my assumption was that by cutting these grooves, it would itself bend at a more gradual angle, because I wasn't pushing on it here. I only had a piece of wood clamped here and of course stabilizing it here. But this area did not bend at all until it was forced to bend. It tore this up. Well, it broke, and I'm gonna leave it It's not going to be perfect. It'll show a blemish, but it will be okay. I'm going to fill these grooves in with thickened epoxy. I'm going to epoxy the entire thing, 1 or 2 coats to make it waterproof, and then I will simply sand this down, and it will show a blemish there, but that's all right. I'm done trying it. It doesn't need to be perfect, but I did learn a lot. So the learning here is that I need to force a less steep of a bend, a more gradual bend. I need to force that because the plywood will not conform itself, and you can really tell on this one how sharp that is and how much it puckered the inside of the plywood. That is a mess. In reality, that can all be sanded smooth, but over here where it's white, that's where the epoxy touched some water. So there was still some moisture in the wood, and that definitely sacrifices the integrity. I can't live with this. I'm getting rid of it. I'm going to salvage the flat piece of wood, but I'm cutting off this bend, and I will start over again. I am also going to shorten my jig by 2.5 inches, because after I made that bent plywood and I got it out on my ground and looked at it and measured it, I saw that it was 12.5 inches instead of 10 inches. All right, this is my 3rd attempt. I soaked it already in my trough. Weighing it down, I have a nice curved piece of wood there to help hold it down, as well as the brace on the left side for the inside of the curve. I got a paint can and traced the curve of a paint can, and then I sanded down the wood to be the same radius. I don't know how much my steamer worked, but I wanted to give it a try anyways. And this is the thickened epoxy I'm using to fill in all the cuts. It's so much like frosting, I kept wanting to taste it. So I'll cover this with parchment paper, and then I can put the second sheet over the top and repeat the entire process. And apply the forms to hold it down. Now, I did have some epoxy that didn't cure very well. I think I did not mix it 1-for-1. So now I got my food scale out there, and I'm going by weight. And the scale's great because I can press the tare button after I pour some in, and it'll reset to 0. And I'm making penetrating epoxy by thinning it with mech. Now, I learned afterwards from the people that make the epoxy that you should not thin your epoxy with mech. They said acetone. I used methyl ethyl ketone because it does not flash off as quickly. They said only thin penetrating epoxy and only use acetone. So I have not had a problem thinning with mech in the past, but based on their much more knowledgeable advice, I will not thin with mech in the future. I will use acetone, and I will buy actual penetrating epoxy instead of trying to make my own. But here I am applying the thinned epoxy all over the wood. That is to make it stronger and waterproof. Okay, now that I have my plywood bent, it's time to put my, I'm not sure what to call it, a reinforcing board. I have a 1x2 inch piece of wood. I'm going to put at the top of all of my vertical plywood. That's going to give more surface area for the top piece to land on. found a bubble level on top of my belt sander worked really well for leveling off the wood I just glued on top of my plywood. And so that way I'm going to have a pretty level surface for the benches to sit on. That worked really well. Yeah. Now to put a 3-degree cut in it so it will mate with the inside of the cockpit well. I have put on 2 coats of thin epoxy, and now I'm putting on 2 coats of varnish. And there it is. It looks pretty good. All right, I did it. I finished my plywood bending project, experiment, whatever you want to call it. I'm satisfied with it. I'm happy with it, and I find it interesting that my very first iteration was pretty much as good as my last one, but I didn't know that at first, right? I thought I could improve it, so I tried and tried again. And now I learned some things from that. Had I stopped at my first one and said, that's good enough," I wouldn't have realized that you can't bend with the grain. I had thought of, after I discovered that, I thought of doing it again and putting the grain vertically so it would bend this way rather than this way and try to, snake around. That's why the grain broke off and stuck out so much, because I had the grain angled the wrong way. So I could have either had just the bend be vertical, or I could have done the entire length vertical. But I didn't want to redo it. I didn't discover that until I was done with my third one, the one I'm finally going to keep. So it's fine. I learned a lot here. I'm not trying to make a pristine showboat. I want it to be as nice as it can be, but to what cost, right? So I have to kind of limit my time and expenses at some point. So what else did I learn? Oh, this one I have no excuse for. The jig was 2.5 inches too high. Now I can look back and realize why that happened. But the bottom line was I wasn't paying enough attention. I didn't measure again. So I measured initially and cut things, but then once I put them in place, I didn't measure to be sure I was right. I ride a lot on assumptions, is what I'm discovering. And, you can get by pretty well through life with assumptions, but there are definite times when you need to check and double check and even triple check. So the stuff I'm doing in here is what needs to be checked more and more often, especially when we're dealing with creating a jig that's going to matter with the thing that you're making. All right, what else did I learn? I think that's about it as far as my summary of final learning. The water worked well, but you don't want to soak it too long because then the plies start separating. So I was trying to manage that. And the very first one did kind of separate a little bit because it soaked too long. So I didn't soak the wood as long after that. All right, that is all I have for you today. Thanks for watching, and I will keep you updated on my progress on my boat project, Aquarius. You can subscribe, and then you will know when my next episode comes out, because I am highly irregular. All right, thanks for watching. Have a great day.